guiding principles of a project like this come completely or sourced completely from the private sector. And that is one of the sectors that are really important when we think about civic life. But too often, these things are just directly translated over into the civic space. And that is a cause for concern. Not every government process or democratic process needs to be completely cost efficient or generate revenue or deliver some discrete product to customers. There's a lack of early public engagement. So not only asking the public what they would want or what would be meaningful, but also being proactive about some of the issues that may come up, especially with data collecting technologies, things like privacy and security. All of these things are often met very reactively. Poor collaboration. Oftentimes, tech vendors, startups, researchers, they may enter into a collaboration with us, but it's not a very meaningful collaboration. The name or the assets are used, and there's very little co-production or co-learning between us and also other civic organizations or community groups. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, having an audience, whether that's policymakers, planners, or citizens, or whoever, that either doesn't have the skills or the enthusiasm for unpacking and using the data that you're bringing. But more and more, our office has been thinking that it's not just a lack of literacy around data, but it's this very assumption that data itself as a kind of a priori foundation or justification for doing any sort of work in the smart city is enough. And this is, we think, particularly dangerous, especially now, as people quite seriously talk about using alternative facts or totally just skirting evidence-based approaches to things. The emotional appeal or the experiential appeal to people is really important and is a fundamental aspect to what makes us humans. We're not clearly rational creatures. So ultimately, we think a data can certainly produce a foundation upon which to act, but it can't necessarily or doesn't necessarily produce a will to act. And not to knock data, but we think that sometimes the conversation around how we justify technologies tends to not go beyond that. And that, again, in this political climate, we think is increasingly important. So there seems to be a kind of crisis in faith when it comes to using civic data, when it comes to our institutions, but more broadly and more importantly, simply in our ability to get things done with each other outside of the private sector or any particular one sector. And I use faith sort of specifically to recall the work of William James. So he, for those who don't know, he basically founded modern psychology and really influenced modern neuroscience. He brought a data-driven, evidence-based approach to the study of the human mind. But doing this, he realized that the other scientists and humans around him tended to overcompensate a bit and tended to get so focused on doing randomized controlled studies or getting all of the data that they were not active or they were not trying new things or experimenting or approaching things from another point of view. And he has this, two really interesting quotes I want to share. He says, "If your heart does not want a world of moral reality, your head will assuredly never make you believe in one." Then he also says, "There are cases where a fact cannot come at all unless a preliminary faith exists in its coming, and where a faith in a fact can actually help create the fact." And I think there are two psychological phenomena that we see embody this today, something that people call the backfire effect. So the more you produce data or evidence to prove someone's theory wrong, the more sometimes they double down on their incorrect beliefs. And so if you don't attend to the things that are creating those beliefs, we're sort of causing the problem to just go deeper and deeper. And then also we see this with confirmation bias and how many times research designs or evaluation criteria are framed around the hunches that we believe we can answer, or the sort of preordained facts that we or foundations think we should be achieving. So basically, a lot of our work has been thinking about some of these values, sort of data not being enough by itself. This is something that Nigel this morning talked about. Thinking about science, thinking about bringing in hypotheses and replicability to getting data is incredibly important. We certainly need to do better at cultivating trust in data, not just our data sets, but in data itself as an important aspect of understanding reality. But I think most importantly, we need to cultivate a good faith in our ability to get things done with data, but with each other. And central to all of this is how we structure and design collaborations. And it's a central lever that we in government have, and it's something that we're increasingly using to take a step back from doing experiments in one-off technologies and doing experiments in collaborations themselves. So real quick, just one example of one of the more recent projects we've been doing. It's called the Local Sense Lab. So there are certainly there are a lot of programs and technologies around IoT sensors for producing better urban data. And there are also a lot of experiments in platforms and portals and wizards and all that. And also shared test beds in studying new technologies. An array of things is one great example that the city of Chicago is doing. But here we wanted to investigate what an alternative to that model might look like. And so the Local Sense Lab was a collaboration, is I should say, it's sort of just in its first phase, between a variety of people, startups, university partners, researchers, artists, community groups, government. And the idea was to investigate what happens if we created a public-private partnership that was decentralized, so where not every objective or goal was coming from one source. In this case, it's not government producing some RFP asking for A, B, C, or D. What happens when we distribute power throughout that network? So we give all of our partners an equal ability to push back or to request a certain aspect of this experiment. What happens when it's open to new pivots, but also open to new players coming in? So not just this initial set of people, but whoever wants to be involved. And also one that's not based on a financial transaction. So we're wondering, how do we structure partnerships where, though we will certainly pay for initial supplies and for people's time, how do we get partners that are also intrinsically motivated to participate, where a technology company is able to test their technology, and a data integration researcher is able to test their new algorithm, and an artist is able, or a journalist is able to tell a story. So what happens when we have a foundation of a partnership based on those motivations? So real quick, again, just to wrap up, our initial sort of proof of concept around this partnership was putting a bunch of sensors in downtown Crossing. We chose this area, and you can see them being put up. They're sort of clearly marked, but they're also nicely decorated by flowers. We put them here for a number of reasons. Downtown Crossing is one of the most socioeconomically diverse sort of transportation hubs in the entire city. It's very busy. But there is a very particular organization there that had a very particular problem that this data, that these sensors could potentially help with. I won't get into that now, I can certainly talk to you later, but it was helpful for us to have an organization that truly wanted some answers when it came to data. And so we put a bunch of things up. It did a bunch of interesting things, and we're currently, right now, figuring out what the next step is for this experimental partnership. So that's that.
Now I know how to treat the Simpson. Hello everyone, my name is Redhair, and I just want to thank you all for sticking with us today on a Friday afternoon. I really appreciate it. And we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about service learning in higher education. So a little bit about me, I'm a doctoral student at Suffolk University, and I work in collaboration with Catherine Kozak and Deborah Harkins, so this is coming from our lab. And, you know, pretty deeply settled in higher ed, being in a clinical psych program. But I'm really interested in cross-collaboration with community partners and how we can really create that engagement between community partners and higher education. So, what is service learning? Service learning is defined as a pedagogical strategy that combines academic coursework, experiential service in the community, and critical reflection. All that's integrated within a course-based, credit-bearing educational experience. So really in sum, it's the idea that we integrate the academic experience for students with meaningful engagement with community partners. And And through that, we give the students a space to deeply reflect on their work and why they're doing it. And the benefits to this for students are many. So two-tiered, really through the deeper understanding of course content that students get from actively engaging in the community, and also they're developing through that engagement an enhanced sense of civic responsibility. And this really comes out through increased cognitive ability, critical thinking skills, and personal values. And not only is it benefiting students, but by making students, or helping students really develop that civic responsibility and those critical values, it's really benefiting the community partner and increasing that engagement between the two. So service learning developed as a pedagogy as a result of Campus Compact, which was a coalition in 1985 of universities that were really responding to the call to return universities and higher education back to its original purpose of creating civically engaged students. And this really launched higher ed into collaboration with community partners and aided in the cross-sector collaboration approach. And not only does it influence students' engagement with the community partner, but this also incorporates faculty as stakeholders through having it be the engagement through the academic piece. And this really helps benefit the service as a whole. So as a brief background, now we're going to get a little psychology on you. So we are looking at a set of data, and we have a few research questions about what components of the service learning course are really affecting student engagement in the community, and what's really being effective in creating that civic mindedness. So our current study is taking place at a mid-sized Boston university, and we're looking at an archive of a semester-long service course that spans 7 service learning course semesters. And this consists of 500 student surveys that are, like our type responses and open responses, but they're from the student's perspective, so it's an interesting thing to think about. And through these service learning courses, they've been integrated with 60 different community partners. Moving forward, a little bit of the sample items of what students had with them was they were responding to their level of agreement with the following. The service learning component of this course improved my understanding of the course material. I feel that my service work benefited the sites and or community members that I worked with, and as a result of my service for this course, I feel better connected to other service learning students and or to my university community. So preliminary findings, we're just starting to really dive into this data, but what we're seeing is that time for critical reflection, so bringing back to the original definition of service learning, those 3 components, academic experience, community engagement, and a space to critically reflect on the work. That time for critical reflection is significantly associated with increased understanding of diversity and social justice issues, a feeling that a student's work was beneficial to the community, a likelihood to continue service learning courses, and a likelihood to pursue service-related endeavors in a community. So you can see that not only is the reflection component really aiding the quality of the work that the students will engage in, but it's also supporting engagement on a long-term and more sustainable level for the students, and then that, in fact, it informs the engagement with the partner as well. So broader implications, I'm going to step back a little bit from the research study. From a personal point of view, I have experience right now in the higher educational realm, but I also have experience as a community partner. I was a director of a nonprofit that worked with refugee students from Burma. They're a Korean ethnic minority. And these refugees would be settled in the Albany area. And we created a program, developed a program that would really influence engagement with a university and with university students, and really to promote not only higher education for the refugee students, but also really working on that connection and empowerment piece for the students and their connection with the community. So with that, we had wonderful students, all of our volunteers were excellent, but we saw the differences between a service learning course and students who were coming to volunteer on their own experience. And again, I have to say, they were all wonderful, and I love them all very much. But there is a difference when the work is grounded in a service learning course, because not only is there that sustained commitment where weekly students were coming to work with their partners, but it also was, you also had the deeper reflection component. They understood the population they were working with, they understood the work that they were doing and how that was influential, and that in turn aided their benefits to the community. So pulling back from just the students, it really helps the community partner and in that collaboration approach by promoting the active citizen engagement among students to stimulate change. So again, benefits are good for everyone, like we said before. And I just have to say also that, so I have influence in the Albany area and I have a lot of experience there, but it's wonderful to come to Boston and hear about all the community work that you guys are doing, and it's great to hear, and I'd love to hear more about it. So future directions, again, this is a preliminary look at the data set, and we're looking to develop another service learning course out of this data, and future directions to pursue. So like I said previously, faculty members are really a stakeholder in service learning courses, so I'm interested in how the reflection component differs across different courses and faculty members, because like we know, everyone who's been in school before, faculties teach material very differently, and how they're giving that space to reflect and how they're informing the work could be different across faculty members, and I'm interested to see how this would influence the development of the students, and also how other forms of community engagement with the added component of reflection outside of academics could compare to this. So thank you for your engagement. Back to you.
Well, we've heard from some really different, very successful programs in cross-sector collaboration. And one of the things that's really apparent listening to all these, and I'm going to steal from Howard Lim's point earlier, and I see he's in the room, which is great, the idea of exchanging values. Clearly, when you have different parts of the city coming together to work on these projects, they've all got different motivations, different success metrics. How do you get to a point where you have common values driving towards some of these big challenges that my colleagues here have been trying to address? So my first question for you would be, how do you, when working with cross-sector partners, come to a common understanding of values for a project, and what are the challenges in getting there?
My initial response is always in these projects, I just lay it out on the table, right? Like if I can't be clear about my goals, there's no way that my partners, my potential partners, can be clear about theirs. So I always go in and have that goals conversation as one of the first one, which is great because often I'm not thinking about it. Like there's actually an overlap there that comes out of that conversation that I hadn't thought about that actually is one of my goals. So I say, oh, here's where I'm coming from, and please tell me where you're coming from. And then I always come up with something like, oh yeah, that's actually what I meant. You're way smarter than me, so you said it better, and I agree that we should do that. That almost invariably happens. And then the conversations where that doesn't go well, great, we shouldn't be partnering. Now we know, it's better to find it out now.
In all our planning projects, the first step will be to kind of establish a vision and a goal for the place. And you get together with a lot of stakeholders, and the first thing they want to do is, I want my building here, or fix this crosswalk, and we kind of tell them to hit the brakes and talk about what kind of place we want it to be and how we want the people inside of it to be interacting. And then we start thinking about the physical steps to help make that happen.
So from a service learning perspective, a lot of people have the misconception that students will come into a community and do the change that they see fit, and we work on an opposite model where it's really the empowerment piece, and we want to make sure that we're aiding the community partners in what they see is needed. What kind of services do they want? What kind of work do they need help with in collaboration? So we really work on that empowerment model, so it's not just the coming in and changing, leading aspect. So again, initial goals, development of the project at the very baseline before the course begins, faculty and all the stakeholders as well.
I'll just mention from a government perspective, we see an insane amount of value with that one that's often overlooked about having meetings that can be messy and that can be open to new perspectives or new collisions between people and their values. And a mistake that we often see, especially in as we engage partners in design workshops and everything, is to move on when we run out of time for that agenda piece onto other things before getting into the deep, murky waters sometimes when it comes to the values that ultimately guide the entire project that you're doing. So.
It's definitely a culture conversation and a systems conversation. How do you make sure your system's open enough to allow for that serendipity, which may end up in a better reflection of the human condition, really? Any questions from the crowd? I'd love to open it up for people. Please.
So I'm not sure that we need to have common values. We need to have appreciation for our partners' values. So Barbie's a great example. For a bunch of academics like me, what are we doing here, today or this week or whatever? Yeah, you've got to sort of be on the same page, so to speak. But I think, often in partnerships, it's really having a deep appreciation of the partner that's critical, not coming to, sort of some common consensus. So, it's like dancing. Are we doing hip hop or are we doing jazz today or whatever? Like, you can't just, you do your thing, I do mine, and then it doesn't work. That's just a thought, and I think actually Bari is a very good example where there are kind of multiple values that brought together and work pretty well together.
I would just say that I think that's such a good point, and I think sometimes, and again, maybe it's the government context, there's so much emphasis on consensus. I don't think we think about the importance or the meaningfulness of a more agonistic approach, where differences can come about, and we're not trying to squash them or synthesize them into one voice where no one really feels like they had some say. And I think our job a lot of times is creating the conditions where people feel that they can express dissent, and then that can add to the conversation or to the product or to the project or whatever it is, without feeling the need that you have to assimilate those things into one false overall value. Thanks.
Any other questions out there? Yes, please, here in front.
I have a question maybe for all of you about how you facilitate equitable involvement in your projects over time. And I feel like with so many open data projects and so forth, the openness part gets pushed really hard at the beginning when it is this table setting mode and problem setting mode. And then when you get into the weeds of actually tackling the problem, people with more capacity and resources kind of start to drive the project forward. And so I'm just curious as to how you guys kind of balance out those challenges and priorities.
I'll be happy to jump on that one to start. I very specifically try to attack that. I mean, my background is actually in education, and I did educational robotics for a while, and the challenge there was that who shows up to an educational robotics workshop? This is like 15 years ago. Who shows up to an educational robotics workshop? All people like me, like the kids that grew up like playing with Legos and wanted to like build things. But there was this opportunity to actually open it up for more people. And so the key for me was again this word invitation, finding alternate invitations to some topic. So we would do workshops where we would like build characters from mythology. And then suddenly I had a whole new set of people who wanted to come in and experience like problem solving, how do we model emotions and robotic movement, things like that. So the same thing holds true for all the data work that I do, right? How do we create multiple invitations to people that we have a hunch are going to be interested in doing something with this information, and that it serves their purposes, and it accomplishes all our goals of trying to activate this to help people make change in the world using data as a media. So for me, it's all about creating multiple invitations, because like I said, some people are going to be all about that spreadsheet, like the dude in the back there, but other people are going to be all about painting a mural. And I think particularly with data, a lot of my focus is on the fact that like that set of invitations sucks right now. It's really bad. And like I think I know all the people that are trying to expand it, and it's a very small list, and I keep on pushing for more of that with data, because and we've gotten to the point where most governments, if they're doing open data programs, realize that the open data piece is the beginning, not the end. So at least we're there, but it doesn't mean we've solved that.
All right, any other questions? Let us have a hand. Yes, please, in front.
This one's specifically about the climate change work. So a lot of what you were projecting for Boston is already happening, say, in a place like Louisiana, where they've had, on the one hand, the very gradual and dramatic loss of land mass along the coast, and then, on the other hand, the flooding that happened this past year. So you have people who aren't even in a floodplain completely unprepared for what happened. So my
in one of these organizations out in the room and you were thinking about a cross-sector collaboration and they were totally new to this, how would you have them start? What would be the first step or maybe the second step you'd have them take in moving towards cross-sector collaboration?
I'll go first. Start with your friends, right? So start with organizations that you might already know, a connection that you might have, where you know there's at least some alignment in the Venn diagrams. Because if you can't make it work there, then it's not going to work with organizations that might have a steeper path. So I would say start with your friends.
Well, if anyone's interested in having some undergraduate students in my business card, and we can get in contact. But I would say, just in addition to that, you know, expanding your network, getting out in there and seeing what kind of other partners would you have, what would that look like, which disciplines would it come from, and also thinking about how really the goals of what cross-sector collaboration would do for your program, and really starting at that baseline and expanding from there.
I would say pick up the phone, send an email. I love when people send me emails saying, hey, I think what you do is cool, or this project sounds cool. And not being afraid to bring your personal values. I think as professionals, we try to have control of the situation. I know I certainly do as a planner. But when you get into the meat of it, if you bring your personal values, you can see where there's alignment so much faster and think about ways to collaborate.
I totally agree with that last statement. I think it's so crucial. I think so many partnerships start with the question of whether or not I want to work with that organization if those values line up. And I think don't be afraid to come to a meeting or set up a meeting with something in mind, but not being afraid if it goes off or if you start generating something else. And one last thing, because I think actually Kathy embodies this a little bit. So we actually just released this Smart City playbook for the city. It's in very drafty form right now. One of the things in there we said, and we don't really mean this, but we kind of do, is stop sending salespeople. And we sort of wrote it with Kathy in mind, you know, working for a company, a private sector company, but it's a relationship that keeps growing and that we keep contributing to, you know, on either end with each other. And at the end of the day, there may be some financial transaction, but it's so important for us, at least in government, to have a thought partner in things.
Wow, you just made my day. Thank you. Well, I can't even add to that. So please join me in thanking our wonderful panel. Thank you so much. And stay tuned for the keynote. Don't go anywhere.
So we're going to start in a few minutes. I'm going to take a lead from Tim Reardon earlier, who told everyone to move to the front half of the room so that this cavernous space doesn't feel so cavernous. So while we're getting set up, please join us in the front.
Easy when you have such smart complimented. Hard on you. You know what's really funny is I read that. And I was like, that's exactly what you do. Little did I know. I mean, yeah, I appreciate you hammering on it.
I feel
You're a hugger. You're a hugger. I love
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for coming. And seriously, you guys are such an important part of this work. And it's like I have a question for you.
Yes.
So,
You are Dan? Yes, I am Dan. So, Kim.
Yeah. So are you headed out or?
Panel in here a few minutes ago from Brandeis. Yeah. Dr. Russell from Brandeis. She said that I'm here on faculty at Northeastern Institute of Architecture. And she's like, how do you not know Dan? Don't know.
We're on the same campus, but that happens a lot.
I want to at least put a face to the name and vice versa, and that I will probably just email you. It's a busy day.
Yeah, we should sit down sometime and catch up.
Yeah.
Hear more about what's going on in your part of campus and tell you what's going on mine.
Exactly. So I just wanted to reach out and say hello, and so you know if I just sent you an email that she sent to, that you know if I was coming.
That sounds good. I look forward to it. It's funny. I have a tough time moderating. But you had an incisive, direct question that got direct.
Thank you. I will actually say that.
I mean, your question is good in that way, but without saying that, that's what you're listening.
Thank you. No, but it was. Getting to the culture issue, feeling like there's more for us to do in that culture space. I don't know what it looks like. Things, but I do think you have to at least understand where I'm at.
Yeah. One of the things that I found generate both law and knowledge of interest, well then the kinds of problems, and that's the thing that shared knowledge through the complexes that they start to get to the goal of form factors. And that's when we start to think a little bit more
I hope it was okay.
No, that was good. No, that's what it's all about. I mean, it's discussion, right? Yeah. No, it is something. I mean, I watch consensus kill. I'm from Seattle, and Seattle City Council gets paralyzed by consensus. And I'm just like, and literally people have learned how to go with the works in terms of, well, we don't totally agree on this. It's like, it is something where, figuring out what are your success metrics in your mind, and how can we make sure whatever we're doing ticks both those boxes, even though the output that we both get is different. If that makes sense. There's lots of different ways to skin this kid out.
I mean, the way I would say is, we got to figure out how we want to dance together.
Yeah.
We don't have to agree why we're dancing together.
No, exactly. There's an analogy here we haven't come up with yet. Well, it was funny because as you were saying that, I was thinking, is this like a junior high dance where the boy goes off this way and the girl goes off this way?
And I think that the dance metaphor is a part of the other question about unusual stuff.
Yeah.
If you're not dancing together, you're not dancing together.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not fun.
Been a good event for you? Good conference for you?
Yeah, we're happy for the outcome.
Good. No, it's been really great to be part of this, both in terms of the advisory board and the conference work. There's so many when we identified Sasaki to bring them in, one of the things that we're trying to figure out is industry beyond tech. There's so many people that work here, but we don't think of them beyond that. We go to tech. And so
tech firms and
We're working on bringing them in, and it is something that we spend some time. We spend time building out the civic tech startup pipeline. And like for example, if I'd been thinking, I would have extended the invitation to some of those folks because they're doing work around public engagement in development projects or online town halls that ameliorate the problem of people can't go to a public meeting. Things like voting technologies and things like that. Just they another kind of flavor on this. And then of course the design and architecture folks are also doing, the practitioners and this sort of thing. So I think that's for the next time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully, no more than 2 years from now. Maybe next year.
Yeah, we'll have to see. It's.
I mean, the number of people who apply is just fantastic.
I mean, it's nice to have more than, you're not scrambling to kind of, we've got just enough to fill the slots. I'm not sure.
Yeah. It's wonderful. I mean, this is quite different than the other two.
Is it?
But the other two are, let's talk about what the possibilities are. And this is, giving a whole lot of people chances to tell us what we've now done. Like the work that was presented on public health yesterday, I was left wanting to know so much more, and I know we very intentionally made these short, and I'm like, but that could have gone on for 2 more minutes. So I agree.
Yeah.
I was good at. Hey Tom, why didn't you talk for an hour?
Yeah, exactly.
I want to find out all about your data warehouse, public health data warehouse.
Is there a way to, continue this conversation in a deeper fashion that isn't so heavy, in terms of logistics? Certainly, I know that's something we'd love to be involved in terms of
we'd like
convening or.
No, we'd like to hear your thoughts. Well, convening, that would be nice. I mean, the problem with these conferences always was the first one was just mind blowing. We wanted 100 people, we ended up with 425.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And then we got all we got was emails. I want to be involved. And we're going to do that. We'll involve you.
Yeah.
So I think we continue to sort of struggle. I mean, I think the fact that there were so many quite specific areas. I have talked to the Boston Foundation. Paul was very interested, but senior staff didn't seem to get about having working groups around something. I don't know if that's something that Microsoft would have any interest in. Not just in the sense of, okay, here's a room and some coffee.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, that's easy for us. I mean, in terms of we have the space. I'm sure you've been in our space in Kendall.
Yeah.
That's easy for us to do, and I'd love to if that's convenient. I mean, we
talked with me about that. I think it's important that Harvard's central role gets out of this because it tends to affect the relational dynamics.
Yeah, and I'm serious. I do not want to mess with that.
Okay, folks, we're going to get going.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. Let's keep talking.
Welcome. My name is Rob Simpson. I'm delighted to welcome you to the last panel of the conference. I'm professor of social sciences at Harvard and a founding director of the Boston Area Research Initiative. So it's been really exciting for me to watch and take part in what's going on in the last several years and really see the growth of BARI as represented by this conference. I've enjoyed the panels a lot and hope you have too. So this is the kind of final event before we segue into a reception, so you'll get a little bit of a reward. We stand between you and the reception, so we promise we won't make it more than an hour that starts at 5. Dan will say more about that. So we have a real treat for you, I think, in terms of this last panel. It's entitled Data in Society, Boston in the National Context. And it's hard for me to think of a topic really that's more timely and important indeed in an era of fake news and, if I might say, affirmative ignorance of data and truth among many. I believe we really need this session, so look forward to it a lot, look forward to the conversation. And we have a terrific setup here. Slight change in the order and composition. let me go over it. One change is that Sandy Pentland, professor of, well, I don't know what department he's in. He's the director of the Connection Science and Human Dynamics Lab. I think he's in the MIT Media Lab, but he's unable to make it today. Last minute change. So what we're going to do is to have our own Dan O'Brien last minute fill in and represent actually some of the issues that Sandy deals with. And I think that'll be fine. So we're going to have Dan go last. Sandy was going to go second, so we'll have Dan go last. You get 20 minutes to your best Sandy Pentland impersonation. No, he'll give us our own, his own sense of things, but we've interacted with Sandy a lot, so I think that would work out just fine. Our other two, and you know Dan, so he's been introduced. Dan is the co-director of BARI, assistant professor here at Northeastern in public policy and also in the School of Criminology. Two other panelists. Evan Horowitz is a journalist, former English professor, former fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard. Evan writes the quick study column for the Boston Globe, which appears both online and in print. You've seen it, it's terrific. Here's a description, which is great, it's just what we need. He digs through data to find information that illuminates the policy issues facing Massachusetts and the U.S. Andrew Theriault joined the City of Boston after serving as Director of Data Science for the Democratic National Committee from 2014 through 2016. He previously served as Senior Data Scientist for Greenberg Quinlan Rosner Research and Director of Research for Pivotal Target. That's a PhD from NYU, so it's kind of science in the city. So you can see we have a nice, real combination. Actually, it's journalism, academia, and government represented on the panel, which is terrific. So hopefully we can have a good conversation about the intermixing of these three domains insofar as it relates to the theme of the panel. Again, data and society, Boston in the national context. And I don't want to take really any more time, I just want to say I do think, not just because of BARI, that Boston is a leader in the national conversation about many of these things, or at least has the potential to be a leader. So here's the game plan. We're going to have the panelists speak for about 10 minutes on the topic, and we'll go in the order of Evan, Andrew, and Dan. Then I'm going to moderate a discussion among the panelists. They can respond to each other. They don't know what the other is going to say. Dan doesn't even know what he's going to say. So it'll really be interesting. And so we'll have a little panel discussion, and then we'll open it up to you in the audience, and then again we'll segue up to the reception. So that's the plan, and we'll start with that.
Thank you, Rob, and fuck data. That's the animating spirit of what I'm going to say, not the official title. I am gradually becoming a data skeptic, which is ironic given the subhead and description of my work at the Globe. It's not because I don't believe in the value of good data. It's because I don't think data has the primacy that we want it to have. I don't think it can serve as the argumentative bedrock that we want it to be. Trust comes first. Data is valuable when it comes from trusted institutions, and right now we have a crisis of trust which comes before the crisis of data. I regret having to say this, since I left a career as an academic to bring data into journalism and to bring a new sort of data and policy sophistication to newspapers, but I feel that effort is failing. Not just my efforts, the effort of people at Vox and Wonk Blog and all of the fact checkers and everyone who thought that by bringing numbers into newspapers, we could tighten up understanding And instead, what we managed to do was get data embroiled in the maelstrom of partisanship that is tearing this country apart. I had coffee with a source of mine a couple of days after the election. We had scheduled it before the election. She is a public health expert, an academic, an economist who works on the opioid crisis and optimal policy around heroin. And we said nothing to each other for an hour about opioids because it seemed pointless. The data was getting better every day. Her understanding of the problem was getting better every day. And yet she felt that it was not going to matter for 4 years, for 8 years, perhaps for the foreseeable future. And I could not dissuade her of that perspective. This, I think, is particularly obvious at the top level, right? Donald Trump doesn't care about good data. And many of the people who voted for him don't care about good data. And many of the Republicans who back him don't care about good data, and the examples are not hard to find. There's no data that the travel ban will make America safer. There's no data that immigrants commit crimes at a higher rate and deserve unique scrutiny. There's no data that if you let mining companies pollute rivers, you're going to have a boom in coal jobs. There's no data that climate change is a Chinese hoax. These things go on and on. At congressional level, you could just look at this week's healthcare debacle. We are pushing forward with a bill that nobody knows, for which there is no official score. Nobody knows the effects, and the Republicans don't care. Now, you could turn this into a counter-argument and say, well, they're pushing it because they're afraid of the score. They're afraid of what CBO is going to say, and isn't that a sign that data really does matter and it's going to stop them? But look how they're pushing back. They're not going to conservative economists to score their own data. They're just undermining the credibility of the CBO. They're calling into question the legitimacy of their analysis. They're turning to trust. Right? It's not an attack on data, it's an attack on trust in the institutions that produce data. So in some ways, that's the bigger problem. It's not that there's a crisis around data, it's that there's a crisis around trust in the people who produce and curate data, that is us, elites, who don't deserve to be trusted, apparently. And you can scoff at that. I mean, I think it's sort of easy to scoff at that and think, well, they just don't understand. But the one thing that I want to convey is that there is no solution to this problem that involves better data. Right? There is no data solution to the problem of trust in data, I don't think. Trust in the institutions that curate data. Something else has to happen at the level of institutional trust. And it's not just Trump. It's bigger than Trump in the sense that it's happening around the world. It's Brexit, look around. But it's smaller in that it's also happening in Massachusetts. And I don't mean to suggest that Governor Baker is Trump or Trump-like or anything like that. He is an experienced manager with an incredible head for detail and could be champion of a data-driven state, ditto for the city. It's not that. It's that in spite of best efforts, the data that I get is that daily journalistic experience has taught me that the data I get from the state and often from the city is garbage. And it's garbage not because it's inaccurate, not because it's wrong, but because it's incomplete, because there's a deep availability bias, because there are no trusted, independent institutions curating this data, just politically overseen institutions that are always demanding permission to share. I don't know which way to go now. Yeah. So, in that sense, at some level, the data problem at the state is worse than at the national level. Because at least at the national level, you have the Census Bureau, you have Commerce, you have BEA, you have all kinds of organizations that are set up, that have an institutional framework designed to protect them from political pressure. They develop, produce, curate, publish data on a regular schedule, on a preordained selection of topics in an insulated way. What happens at the state and city level is not like that. It's very often ad hoc. Oh, we have this, should we share it?
oh, what else can we get, and then we can share that. And every time is the same question, would we be allowed to share? Would it be okay if we shared this? An example, Medicaid data. I got a tip in early January that there was something strange going on with Medicaid rolls in the state. This was before the governor came out and announced his penalty, or proposed penalty, on employers who aren't providing health insurance. So at the time, someone suggested to me, hey, you should really look into this. And I said, okay, so I called CHIA, which is supposed to be a clearinghouse for medical data in the state. So I called them and I said, what do you know about employer-sponsored coverage in the state? Is it going up? Is it going down? You have previously published a report on this biannually, and yet the most recent biannual report is missing. What's going on? They did not call me back. Instead, I got a call back from the governor's office, from an aide who has in the past tried to get me fired. Suffice it to say, he did not give me what I was asking for. Not because they didn't have it. And the reason I know they had it is because they leaked it to somebody else the next day who would write a better, more friendly piece on it. Right? That is not how you handle data. A second example, opioids. DPH I think it was DPH, but DPH put together this, I think, very nice and effective dashboard with lots of statistics about the opioid crisis in Massachusetts. And one of them really jumped out at me. I'll just make sure I don't get it wrong. More than 2/3 of people who died from an opioid-related overdose had a legal opioid prescription at some point from 2011 to 2014. Right? So they're trying to connect legal opioid prescriptions with opioid overdoses. And I'm generally skeptical of this connection. And we'll talk about that. It's a separate issue. But I thought, oh, that's kind of convincing. But then it dawned on me. I wonder what percentage of people who didn't die of opioid overdoses also got opioid prescriptions in the years 2011 to 2014. If it's the same percentage, then the statistic has a totally different meaning. So I called DPH and said, hey, can you get me this? And they said, no way. Not I don't have it, not I can't get it, no, I won't give it to you. So, I mean, you see the problem. It's not that the data is fabricated, right? It's not that it's made up. It's that it's misleading because there is this deep availability bias built into the political systems that control its publication and release. And as I said, this is not about Baker. It was at least as bad under Governor Patrick because the communications system at the time was very tightly controlled. I mean, I remember trying to get cost estimates for tax breaks from DOR and being told, no, I'm sorry, I'll give that to you after the vote. Right? You have this data. You can have it after the legislature votes on it. Thank you so much. So I think it would be nice to have insulated agencies in the state and the city, fully insulated, to produce data with greater regularity on a predetermined set of topics. A CBO for the state would be great. Maybe also bringing these out of the executive branch and giving the legislature, councils more control over what should be published, making data a kind of part of the battle between legislative and executive forces. But even that's not going to solve the bigger problem because, as I said, at the national level we have these insulated organizations and we still have this crisis around data. I was at a different conference talking about trust in the media recently, and the point I made there seems to me totally worth making here, which is that one of the big problems with the assault on the media is that there is no independent third party who can stand up for the credibility of the media apart from the media. It's not clear who else can rush to the defense of the media. And for the media to defend itself is like Nixon saying he's not a crook. You can't credibly defend your own credibility. But it also doesn't seem like there's anybody else who can credibly defend it. And the problem with data is the same. Unless we have institutions that can credibly defend the credibility of their data, all you have is availability bias and political pressure and untrustworthy data, even if it's accurate. I wish I had a solution to offer. I do not, but I do really want to insist that the trust problem is deeper than the data problem. And that it just happens to be the case now that every time I write about unemployment rates or the economy in the country, I get 15 trolls who email me within an hour to tell me that The national statistics are fabricated. And I have no idea how to argue with
I don't know if that was intentionally gauntlet throwing, but I feel like I have an obligation here to present a slightly more optimistic view of things. So, you know, in my role as Chief Data Officer of the City of Boston, I really do want to make the case that data coming from cities and states can be a force for good, because ultimately I have to believe that, otherwise I wouldn't be here. I would, you know, go work for the tech industry and pay off my student loans finally. But I'm a firm believer in the idea that we can do good with data. And that's not to say that I'm naive enough to think that data isn't political. It obviously is. But that doesn't mean that data is always biased because it's political. In fact, you know, my favorite example of data in politics is the value of transparency. You know, that is a political argument. In fact, in the state of Massachusetts, that is facilitated by a policy, the state's public records law. That's the best friend we have in promoting open data, because I can walk into the police department and tell them, well, you know, I would love to release the data set on your officers' interactions with residents throughout the city. And they're willing to do that and eager to cooperate, because they know that if, you know, they're not sharing proactively with us, they're going to get another call from the ACLU where they're obligated by law to respond. And, you know, to say that that is not political is silly. It was created because of an act of the state legislature. So I think just because it's political doesn't mean it's bad. It can be positive or it can be negative. But we can't remove politics from it entirely. And just to get back to more of the specific theme of this panel of you know, putting Boston in the national context, I've had a lot of conversations with my colleagues and counterparts in other cities over the past few months. I think, you know, the motivation for this panel in part largely came from the results in November, and I think a lot of us have been doing some soul searching about what that means for what we're doing and what that's going to look like over the next 4, 8, or however many years. And, you know, among those of us working at the city levels, we feel a big new responsibility here, because, you know, suddenly we've gotten really comfortable for the past 8 years having a government in Washington that was on our side to, you know, try to promote a lot of the things that we care about, whether it's transparency and open data, or it's about, you know, the kind of values that, frankly, a lot of people who do data and work in government have around issues like immigration or healthcare or climate change. And, you know, just the fact that there aren't facts and data involved in the current administration's policy choices around those things, you know, doesn't mean that the people who care about data and are interested in these things don't have a vested interest in using data to, you know, promote things that we consider good. We've had a lot of conversations at the city level here and in many other cities around these kinds of issues. For example, how do we deal with data about immigration? And how do we make sure that we don't keep anything that we don't really need that might reflect somebody's citizenship status or religion or place of origin, and make sure that, you know, we're not inadvertently opening these people up to risks that we shouldn't be exposing them to. Or in areas like healthcare, how do we make sure that with the government at the federal level not promoting all of the options that are available to our residents, how do we make sure that they have that kind of information and be connected where they need? Or on climate change, sure, you know, we're not moving forward at the national level, but the fact is, cities have the highest concentrations of people, of automobiles, of businesses, of large buildings. You know, there is something we can do if we work together to try to reduce our overall footprints. And we've taken on a much bigger role because now it's on us. You know, we can't expect that the federal government is going to come and take charge of the big things, and we can focus just on these little things about getting trash picked up or, you know, filling potholes. That there are bigger issues at play now, and it's the responsibilities on our shoulders to make sure that that stuff gets taken care of if nobody else does it. And in terms of how data is used in government, you know, it's also on us to think about how do we set standards and best practices for how data is used. You know, with data.gov, it offered a lot of promise because it's a way not only to share federal data, but I think a lot of people don't realize it's also an aggregator for data from states and from cities. And that is conducive to saying, well, if, you know, we have 20 different cities contributing their data on the same things, let's encourage them to use shared standards. And maybe if November had gone differently and we had another 4 or 8 years of administration who cared about these things, we would have made it to the point where we had standards across the country of how to do this. Because having those standards allows us to compare and see, who's doing this well, who's not, and how do we learn from people who are doing it well to make it better across the country. Well, now that's not there from the federal level. We've got to figure that out for ourselves. And I'm part of a network of chief data officers that's working on those exact issues right now and trying to come up with some standards where, we start applying it to our 20, 25 cities. Now we've created a real movement, and we can give these standards to other cities, to smaller cities who might not have the capacity to dig into these things and come up with them on their own, or try to figure out, what's the best way to adapt what they have for some other use. We can use our collective capacity to solve those problems and provide guidelines for others to use. And the same for best practices about how we use data. Not only, what are the kind of analyses we need to do and what kind of applications are appropriate for our data, but also more basic things like how do we handle data in a responsible way? Getting back to what I said about immigration, how do we set standards for balancing privacy and usefulness of data? That if you're going to go all the way to the extreme of privacy, then we probably won't be able to do much of anything with data because we'll never see any individual level data. And, I think different people have different views on this. My take is that I think there is some level where we're willing to find some balance in order to get benefits out of being able to use data. But we have to be very, very careful that we're using this responsibly and never taking any liberties that we shouldn't, or exposing people to any risks that aren't justified by a clear goal. And I think it's also up to us, in the context of this federal administration, to set a really high bar and set public expectations for not only transparency and open data and how the government shares what it's doing with the public, but also how we're using data, making sure that the policy choices we're making are informed by data. Because we don't want the public to get complacent and think, well, data's not really a thing anymore, and it's just normal not to use it, because it's not, and it shouldn't be. And we need to set the standards and expectations so that the public looks at the federal government and says, why are you not doing what these cities and states are? And I think that responsibility is now on us in a way it hasn't been before. And then thinking about where Boston stands specifically, as somebody who grew up rooting for the Bruins and the Red Sox and the Pats and the Celtics, I think I have a right to say that, yes, we have a bit of a chip on our shoulder when it comes to our place in the world. But when it comes to data, I think that's really justified, because not only are we a thriving economy here in Boston with a healthy budget in the city and a great tech sector and an even greater academic community, but we're also actually in this nice sweet spot where there are places like New York, which are also very wealthy and have capacity. But in a way, they're almost too large to be as innovative as we can, because we have the resources, but we're not so large that we're spending all our time trying to just keep the lights on. We have the opportunity to innovate and the resources to do it. And so what that means is we have not only an obligation to do the work that we can do for the benefit of the residents here, but we can serve as a lab to figure out the best way to do this so that other cities, particularly those without the resources and advantages we have, can emulate us and do better in their own locations. So, some of this is figuring out what it is that cities can and should do with data. I think that this is something that is really new still. 5 years ago, there weren't city chief data officers. Now, almost every large city in the country has one. And so we're really setting the model for what that means, and every city's doing it differently. And we're figuring out, what works, what doesn't. We try things, and sometimes we succeed, and sometimes we fail. But what that does, it gives us knowledge either way, because then we can go to the next city. We can go to Worcester or Springfield or Haverhill or Lawrence or wherever and say, well, here are the things that are really useful, and here are the things that probably aren't worth your time. And they don't have to waste energy doing the things that we already know aren't a great way to spend their resources. And what we can also do as we do that is keep an eye towards making sure that what we build is extendable to other places. So that can involve doing things like building open source tools and applications, and doing it in such a way that other cities where they might only have 1 or 2 people working with data rather than 20, they can go and deploy that in their own city in a much quicker time than it took us to build it in the first place. And finally, I think there's also a real opportunity here for us to explore new models for collaboration, because even here in Boston, where we have a lot of resources in the city and a lot of resources in the community, it's still hard to figure out how we do everything we can do with data, because ultimately my team could be 10 times its size. We could never do everything the city could be doing to benefit its residents with data. So what we need to do is figure out what the right models for collaboration are. Some of those are with academics. For example, most of you in this room have probably used our data before. Some of you have worked with us directly. And that's a wonderful thing, and we need to figure out how to do that in such a way where we're not just sharing data and then working independently, but working in collaboration with one another so that we can make sure that the things that get built are for the benefit of everyone and don't get tossed aside after some publication or after a hackathon is over or something like that. We're also looking at figuring out what's the right model to handle collaborations with the tech community and volunteers who want to work on a civic project in addition to the other work they have. So, for example, one thing we've started doing recently is we're actually launching a collaboration with a group called Data for Democracy. It's a volunteer data scientist group. And they came about after the election where a lot of data scientists wanted to get more involved in civic causes. And so we're working on a project with them to predict crashes throughout the city. The idea there is simply that we have all this data on transportation and things about road conditions and crash histories, and even citizen-reported complaints of here are road hazards all across the city. But it's a challenge to figure out what we do with that at scale to make sure we prioritize our resources. It's something we've been thinking about doing internally, but we realized this is a perfect application for something that we could bring others into, because this is by and large open data, and it involves a lot of different skill sets, some of which we have, some of which not so much, but we can draw on the resources